So Josh Heupel reveals that the Vols don't plan to redshirt Nico, and not a surprise at all because you would like to get him in there for some garbage time, if nothing else, against other teams, and you would like to make sure that he's ready if something does happen to Joe Milton. So, um, does this declaration really matter? Is it smart? Let's go with today's tough question: is does it matter? Does it matter for recruiting? Tell me why this is pertinent. I have an idea, Caleb, but let's start with you, and we'll be sure to include you on the message board. You can also, if you're watching on Twitter, you can post responses on our Twitter feed, and we'll get to those as well. Soon to have a text line, which we're looking forward to. But does it matter? Caleb, that he said Josh Heupel did that Nico is not going to redshirt.
No, well, yes, actually it does, because I think what matters is, but I don't think it matters in a bad way. I think what matters is it says what Josh Heupel expects out of Nico, which is what I expect out of Nico. I don't think Josh Heupel expects to have Nico for more than 2 years as a starter anyway. I mean, I think Heupel's pretty convinced that Nico's going to be so good that he's gone after 2025 to the NFL. And so it doesn't really matter if you redshirt him that or not at that point, because you really don't need him for another year. And so I think this is more about, in Josh Heupel's mind, look, we know he's going to be gone after 2025 anyway. It's much smarter for us to play him as much as we can this year when we can, so he can develop where he needs to, so he's ready to go to be as good as possible in 2024.
No, agreed. I don't think that he's going to be around Tennessee for a full 4 years, much less 5 years, assuming he stays healthy. Here's the other reason that I think it matters is because you're telling recruits that if you show up and you're ready to play, I'm not going to try to milk another year out of you by redshirting you. And let's face it, there are a couple of guys on this team that they're not redshirt worthy. And we're going to talk about Arian Carter. That's one of them that are true freshmen that are just not going to be dudes that are going to redshirt. Ethan Davis would be another. So I think he's sending a clear indication to anybody that's listening that if you show up and you're ready to play, you're going to play as a freshman. That has been knocked down on the importance scale, but with NIL, it's not as important playing early, and you'd still rather be ready for the NFL, I believe, than play early as a consensus among prospects. But it is still important. You don't want to show up and just sit there for a year. I mean, Fred White had to do that because of an injury, and he said it was one of the darkest times and toughest times in his life. So I can't tell you how many players, we talked about Joey Matthews from Sevier County, how many players that had a bad first year and their entire football career went astray. So I think what Josh Heupel is saying, yes, loyal to upperclassmen, those guys are the foundation. But if you show up and you're ready to play, you're going to play. So it's a statement that I don't think gets a lot of headlines, but in recruiting circles, I think it probably means something, and it's pretty significant.
Yeah, it permeates throughout. And it also, I think...
Great word.
I also think it helps the players that aren't redshirting, the Nicos and the Arian Carters, because the more you can get them in the games, the more they feel the confidence from the coaches. I mean, I thought last year, I think one of the best things for Joe Milton's confidence to have him ready to go this year was Josh Heupel was ready to put him in as a backup for a lot of mop-up duty last year to make plays. And and Joe Milton's arm did look a lot better than it did the year before. And I think that had a lot to do with Joe Milton finishing the season strong starting this year. I don't know if Nico's going to need that same type of support that Joe Milton needed. So it is kind of an apples and oranges comparison, but I do think it helps. And with Arian Carter, it's now necessary, as we're going to talk about later on the show. He doesn't have a choice. He's got to play Arian Carter. And so I think that it's a lot of, it's to send a message to recruits. It reminds me of, remember when Lane Kiffin was at Tennessee for the 1 year? He sometimes made some questionable decisions with personnel. I think a lot of times he would put Bryce Brown in on goal line plays when he should have kept Montario Hardesty in. But I felt like that was to send a message to recruits like, hey, I'm getting this guy in there now. And if you come, you're going to play. And before he was out robbing gas stations, Nukes Richardson was in on some Wildcat packages. I remember that.
Yeah, and he was a punt returner too. The only guy I've seen straddle 2 punts And it's the only time I've seen a guy straddle a punt once, much less twice, where he allowed the ball to go between his legs in the same season. That was an amazing feat. If you ever see that again, I will write you a $10,000 check, Caleb, because that
Definitely the
was
most questionable decision he made the entire time he was on campus at Tennessee.
that's not true. Lance, let's get back to quarterbacks. Lance said, I don't really expect any quarterbacks brought in by Heupel to redshirt, second string quarterback, of course. That is the day and age that you're at. And listen, 20 years ago, you'd look at Tennessee's quarterback room and you'd say, man, that's trouble because they don't have any proven depth. Because what did coaches like to do? They like to stack them. I remember coaches telling me, well, you want to take a quarterback in every single year. You want to take one for depth. Well, these kids can transfer now. And let's say worst case scenario, Joe Milton graduates after this year and Nico doesn't get along with somebody and transfers. Well, then Josh Heupel is going to go out and get another quarterback in the transfer portal like Notre Dame did with Sam Pittman. So the way you view quarterbacks as far as stacking them is just not realistic. Now, what does that do for coaches? Well, it does this. You come into this season, another worst case scenario. If, let's say, Milton wasn't ready and Nico was too young, the season basically goes down the drains. That's where you are, but that's where all the other programs are. And I said Sam Pittman at quarterback. I'm sorry, Sam.
You meant to say Sam Hartman.
Yeah, Sam Hartman. Sorry. But do you see what I'm saying?
Picture Sam Pittman as a quarterback. Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You're sorry, Lance. Imagine pushing all of that in, all your chips in every season. Well, that's exactly what every team has to do. There's not a solid BJ Coleman. No offense to Gaston, but there's not a solid backup in a BJ Coleman or Rick Clausen waiting in the wings for the elite programs. Those guys are transferred and gone somewhere else to play.
You're right. And Heupel can find any quarterback. I mean, if Nico's gone, Heupel will find a quarterback in the transfer portal immediately. Josh Heupel will attract quarterbacks the way Mick Jagger attracts groupies. I mean, it's just good.
That's a young Mick Jagger.
Yes.
I don't know. He's probably still doing okay if you think about it.
Exactly. The way Drake
I'll choose you and you and you.
Like the way they get in line to meet Mick Jagger in his bedroom is the way quarterbacks will be to meet Josh Heupel. Just not in the bedroom, but it's going to be
the analogy that went very astray. But no, I see exactly what you're saying. So if Tennessee needed a quarterback in this offseason to transfer in, they're going to absolutely have their pick of the litter, right?
Yes, they will get who they want, when they want, from wherever they want.
Hey, think about this. Things don't go well at Texas and Arch Manning isn't starting and he ever decides to transfer, and don't think for a second that the Manning family wouldn't do that, because people forget how big of a deal the Eli Manning thing was. They were like, you're not John Elway. You can't dictate where you go. And John Elway was a big deal too. But the Manning family, they were determined that Eli was not going to play for the Chargers. So if anything goes south, if Steve Sarkisian starts to take a sip or two, ouch. But if he does, then Arch Manning would look to go elsewhere, and who could blame him? And don't think that Tennessee wouldn't be in the conversation. They would.
That's getting more open by the day. I mean, you saw Caleb Williams' dad basically say, if a really crappy team has the number 1 draft pick, Caleb Williams isn't coming out. And I firmly believe Peyton Manning didn't come out in 96 because the Jets had the number 1 pick and he didn't want to get drafted by New York.
That's a little too conspiracy theory for me. I've heard you say that. I'm not willing to go down that line.